everybody to DSAF's educational series. If you don't know me, I'm Donna Daly. I'm the program director, and I have with us Joyful Stoves from the Department of Health and Human Services Developmental Disability Division. She's here tonight to talk about eligibility requirements for developmental disabilities and the wait list, and to talk to us about some new changes that are coming about, and any questions that you might have regarding eligibility and when you apply for servicing through the state. So please welcome Joyful.
All right. Hopefully you guys all got the handouts that are behind me. These are going to be the most current things we have out there. They are also all on our website, so if anyone needs to reference them later, can go back to that. Like Donna mentioned, I'm going to talk about the services we provide, the eligibility requirements, the application process, how you actually get funding for services, the rate list, and then touch on, we have an expectation that people will also work with Nebraska VR for vocational rehabilitation.
And that's changed, right? Is that a new implementation?
In the last about 2 years, yes. All right. Anytime we do presentations, we get to speak about the governor's initiatives. The ones we have really focused on is trying to be efficient and effective. We are doing a lot more outreach like this to just try to be more transparent in our division and trying to really simplify things so that everyone can understand it. I think I skipped one. Nope. All right, so in the Division of Developmental Disabilities, we are responsible for the delivery of all developmental disability services in Nebraska. All of our services are funded through Medicaid. We do this in two ways. We have Medicaid home and community-based waivers, and those are the services we provide in the community. So we have a waiver that's for all ages. It's a comprehensive waiver. It can be provided to, and it is provided to some children across the state. I believe we have 150 children across the state that do receive DD services. Their parents applied early, and they were offered residential services. We do not do any day services until someone turns 21 and is done with the school system. So someone on the comprehensive waiver as a person under 21 is only getting residential. We also have a day waiver that's available only to people over 21, and it's just the day piece. And then we also have state-operated services. We have an ICFMR or ICFDD down in Beatrice. About 100 people, a little less than that. We're not currently admitting anyone new there. So our home and community-based services are what I'm going to talk about today. It is the majority of the people we serve in the state. We serve about 5,000 people in Nebraska through home and community-based waivers. So when someone comes to us and wants to be on a home and community-based waiver, they want community-based services, we first have to determine eligibility, and I'll talk about what that entails. Then we provide the funding, and we provide oversight. So our division isn't actually going out and doing the coming into your home and working with your child. We are providing the eligibility, the funding, and the oversight for services. So since we are responsible to serve as many eligible people as possible, we require that everybody have Medicaid and get on one of the Medicaid home and community-based waivers. When someone is on a waiver, what you're actually waiving is your right to be served in an institutional setting. So the money that would be going to an institutional setting to care for someone goes into a community setting. So that's how Medicaid looks at it. That's what the term waiver means.
I'm so sorry.
So again, that requires, since you have to be on Medicaid to get a Medicaid waiver, we do require that everyone apply for and accept Medicaid services. I will just briefly say for children, we understand that there are some people who parental income may keep them from getting Medicaid. One of the handouts today is what do I need to know about Medicaid? And this is just very basic information about what Medicaid is. Medicaid is an insurance program. It is based on income, and then it is based on having a disability or another medical need. So there will be some children who do not have Medicaid. They were denied only because of parental income. And if that is the case, that person can be on our wait list for services. And if we offer them funding, they will get Medicaid at that point. They will become a household of one. While I'm talking about Medicaid, I will also point out that once a person turns 19 in Nebraska, they are now a household of one. So your son or daughter may still live at home. When you're applying for Medicaid at 19 or older, they are a household of one, regardless.
No longer counts towards whether they qualify for Medicaid.
Correct, right.
If your income's too high below that, then there's no sense in applying.
You still want to apply because you want to know that your income is what kept them off. You want Medicaid to say, yes, there is a disability, but income is too high.
Okay.
So you want that documentation.
So,
If we do that now,
Mm-hmm.
and when they turn 19, do we have to reapply again?
You will have to reapply. Even if they have Medicaid, when they turn 19, you have to reapply.
Okay. We have to wait until they're 19? and
Correct.
apply?
I would defer you, if you're familiar with PTI Nebraska, parent-teacher information out of Omaha, they're statewide. They are really, really good at holding your hand and walking you through when to apply for Social Security, when to apply for Medicaid, how to do that. Talk to Nina or one of the other ladies.
But we got mixed up and she was here last week. So she's going to come back in February.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, Nina will be like your best resource for that.
And though, on the waiver, they can qualify for Medicaid through waiver because the parent's income no longer
Correct.
counts on that. It's only their income. So if you're receiving child support for that child, that would count. If they're receiving Social Security, that would count. Also, on a federal level, with SSI, you have to apply. They start receiving that at 18, so they would then be qualified for Medicaid at 18 because they're receiving SSI. You don't have to wait until they're 19. No, they only, SSDI is only if you've had a job and you're pulling back from what you've already put in. Otherwise, they stay SSI. Pardon me?
what's SSDI?
SSDI is when you've been working for 20 years and you become disabled.
Oh,
So like I received SSDI because I just became disabled 3 years ago. So, and then that is different also because now Coda receives money from my SSDI versus him being on SSI, which is way easier because I don't have to submit income stuff every month. But once he turns 18, I have to reapply for SSI and get him back on SSI versus SSDI. And I also believe that there's a caveat with Medicaid that where there's federal funding for Medicaid after age 18, if the child has a job of any kind, they will use that income as well. And they will still, and they could actually do bill for that.
and they do have some income set off, like they're allowed to make so much before
Right.
that's the benefits. So PTI will be here next month, so if you have any questions about Medicaid, come back next month. And she'll-
Yeah,
Just-
PTI is great about talking about Medicaid, Social Security, all of that. That's what they do a lot of.
Is there a website that I can look at more information on
I think if you just Google PTI Nebraska,
Then it'll just.
yeah.
Comment again on what you said about, when you were talking about the income, the parents' income, and you said something about the parents' income may not count, and then you just said something about the.
Right. When a person turns 19, they are considered an adult, so the parent's income doesn't count at that point.
But
Prior to that, so you can be on our wait list, your child can be on our wait list. If we are able to give you a call and say, hey, we have funding available, do you want to accept services on this waiver? Once you say yes and you get on a waiver, then parental income doesn't count.
Okay. So that's only if you have funding.
Right.
But right now, anybody with a child with Downs could go through the process of applying for waiver, going through the eligibility determination process, and being put on the wait list.
We're already on the wait list.
Uh-huh.
but we
Coda
haven't
was on the wait
gotten
list
any
for
calls
5 years.
about Funding.
Yeah, Coda was on the wait list for 5 years because I put him on when he was
So
9 months old.
just to give me an idea, because a lot of this is going to be about the eligibility and how to apply, and it sounds like some of you have already gone through that. So how old are people's children? Have you applied for our services? Have you not?
How do we find out for sure if we, I think I've applied, but I don't.
One of the handout, helpful contacts. Email the waitlist email address, the ddregistry@nebraska.gov, or give us a call. I've actually, on this, you'll see the phone number is the same for everything. We used to give you specific phone numbers, but we don't want you leaving voicemail and then someone's sick for a couple weeks and you're just left. So the number that is on here, it's answered Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. They'll get you a hold of someone that day that can help you and answer your questions. But there are specific email addresses. Again, it doesn't go to a specific person. It goes to a group of people that can answer the question.
And the wait list is 9 years now, right?
Right now, we're meeting needs from 2012.
Right.
So my daughter's 13
It,
and
de-
been on the list for quite a long.
it is based on when you applied.
They've also done a lot of overhauls to the wait list, if I understand this correctly. They've gone through and they found out that there are people on the wait list that were deceased. They've gone through and found that there's people that no longer need it for whatever reason. So they have eliminated a lot of the wait list, and it is something that is very actively being pursued.
Right.
So you're serving anybody who went on as of 2012?
Yes, I believe so.
Background check or paperwork.
Right.
So it's not just for the minors then?
It's for anyone who has been found eligible, and I'll get to this in just a moment. So,
The 19-year-olds have to be on this wait list?
yes. Yes, you cannot, and I will get that in a little bit, but you cannot be offered funding until you've been on the wait list. So even if you're coming in an emergency, your name goes on that wait list, and then you come off for the emergency. Everybody passes through the wait list. The wait list is just, and I'll cover it. It's also in one of the handouts today. So have most people applied with us?
My son, Dakota, is 16. I applied for the wait list when he was approximately 9 months old. He would receive funding when he was in kindergarten and has been on waiver since then. So we've gone through all the changes
Okay.
and all that with waiver. He currently receives in-home residential services, and he also receives respite if we
Okay.
never get it finished.
Okay.
Yes, I think I have applied and they came out, did like because they had to meet with us one-on-one and do an assessment to see whether or not you qualified for respite care. But then, you have to do that every year or no?
And I
At
have
that
done
time,
every 2
maybe.
years.
There is a level of care assessment now that is being done every year for everyone on the wait list. And part of what you were talking about is we're cleaning up the wait list. So there are people on the wait list who, when we went to offer funding, we realized, wow, you don't meet any of our requirements anymore. So now every year we are doing a level of care assessment with everybody on the wait list. So,
I think he was about 4, and that was the last time. So I'm not even sure that, yeah.
yeah. Okay. And we have just started doing level of care in the last few months. So we obviously haven't made it to the couple, I think we have 1,900 maybe.
So is this something that parents, like, in our group should look at applying like when they're 1?
Absolutely. Yep.
See, that's like the mixed messages that I feel like you get, that people are like, no, you aren't gonna be able to be on it until
You're
you're
not
like,
gonna
there's
qualify
18, you get it.
There's a-
Start over.
There's a lot of SCs for birth to 3 that don't understand exactly how waivers work. And so basically their default is apply for Medicaid. Oh, you don't qualify because you make too much money, sorry. You're in that unfortunate group of people that falls
Yeah.
between the cracks because you make too much but not enough to actually pay for all this. They don't tell you about the wait list.
And
So
And
that's
our
the problem.
division is separate from the division of Medicaid. So you do have to apply for both Medicaid and for developmental disability services. They are 2 separate applications. They are both through Access Nebraska. So I'm going to direct you back to my PowerPoint that I'll maybe stick to a little bit. But so we are not Social Security benefits. That's a whole other thing you do need to know about and apply for and talk to PTI Nebraska. We're not Medicaid. We use Medicaid money, but you have to apply separately for Medicaid. We don't do any financial assistance. So sometimes we'll be talking to someone and they're like, well, I think I applied. And then they'll say, I'm getting a disability check. That's not us. We don't send you any checks. So if you're getting a disability check, it's Social Security. Unfortunately, we use a lot of the same terms for many of these different programs, so it does get very confusing if you have a stack of things you're filling out. We don't provide any daycare. Depending on how long you've been, we used to provide and pay for some in-home childcare. We don't do that anymore. We are not the Medicaid Aged and Disabled waiver. It is another home and community-based waiver offered by Medicaid. To be on the developmental disabilities waiver, all level of care is based on the level of care someone needs to move into an institutional setting. Our institutional setting is like a center for developmental disabilities, again, like Beatrice. Mosaic has a few private ICFs up in Omaha. To be on the aged and disabled waiver through Medicaid, you have to have nursing facility level of care. So if your child also has a high level of medical needs and would qualify for nursing facility, then you may want to look at the Medicaid aged and disabled waiver also. That is an application through Medicaid. They have the same caveat as we do, where if you get on their waiver, then you get Medicaid. So it's the same thing for children. Some people qualify for both of our waivers. Some people don't qualify for either. I'm not saying this out here as this is a gold mine, go to them, because you may not qualify. But they do not have a wait list. So if your child does qualify for it and you're able to get on it, it's something you can do while you're waiting for our services. There is not a wait list for the aged and disabled waiver. However, we have had a handful of children recently who were on it and no longer met their level of care because their level of care tool is redone. So we are working on absorbing them into our system if they meet our level of care.
Do Katie Beckett and medically handicapped children's funding exist anymore?
Yes, they are straight Medicaid services. They're not waivers anymore.
Did you already talk about emergency?
No. All right, so what are our services? And some of you probably know, maybe all of you do, but so our services are all voluntary. We teach skills. I mentioned the aged and disabled waiver. That one's a really medical model because it's looking at that nursing facility, so it's kind of a do-for-you waiver. The developmental disability waiver is we're trying to teach you. We believe that everyone can learn. So we might be teaching one person to pick up their spoon and feed themselves or to pick out which shirt they want to wear. We might be teaching another person how to read a bus schedule and you take their bus around town. But we do assessments. We try to teach what the person needs. So our goal is to help participants experience a high quality of life and really interact with their community. We want people. The reason you're living in the community is because you want to be part of your community. So that's really our goal, is to help people be independent and integrated. So we focus on what a person wants and what they need. I mentioned that we teach skills. We call it habilitation. You'll hear it from providers. You'll hear it all over the place. Habilitation is a big, long, fancy word. It just means we're teaching. So everybody knows the term rehabilitation. If you break your leg and you have to learn how to do things that you could do, you call it rehabilitation. If you're learning to do them in the first place, it's habilitation. So the 30-year-old who's learning to tie her shoes, that's habilitation. Her peers have already learned it. We're teaching it to her because that's her current need. So most of our services are habilitative. We have them kind of broken into day services and residential services. I mentioned the day piece is only available when you're 21 and over. You're out of school. Day services are focusing on teaching job skills or providing support on a job. So we've redone our PowerPoint a couple times. I don't recall if I'll get into depth with Voc Rehab at the end or not. But we do work a lot with Voc Rehab. Most of our developmental disabilities providers are also Voc Rehab providers. So ideally, one provider will be working with the person throughout looking for a job, getting placed at a job, and then continued job skills coaching on the job. The person doesn't really need to know what the funding source is. Hopefully we can just be in the background paying the provider what they need. And then residential services focus on independent living. So you pointed out very beautifully that residential services can happen in your home. There's a lot of misunderstanding. I hear from parents, well, we're not going to apply for services. We don't need them yet. My son or daughter is not moving out of my house. They don't have to. Apply for services. If magically we give you funding, we can come into your house. You'd only need to use a waiver service once every 90 days to stay on the waiver. Some people like to just do it so they can have Medicaid. That insurance is nice to have there. Some people, it's not that hard to go on a date every 3 months. Get out of your house once in a while. Just do that respite.
Well, and there's so many more appointments, especially if you have other kids, because you got therapies, 1 to 10 times a week, and they can help with transport to that, and then, you don't have to take your work, and you don't have to take off. If they, they take Coda to school, and they bring him home from school, so I don't have to worry about him. Respite, dude? No. And when she says we provide these services, it's actually, it's not, she's not gonna come out to your home. You actually have to choose a provider, like ILCPS and achievements, that type of thing. And their employees are the ones, they're direct support professionals that come in and work with your child. And they're the ones that are actually doing the transport and things like that. So we've never had to worry about, I read about horror stories about buses, we've never had to worry about that with Coda. They also we have been able to have them attend his IEPs at school, and where they're doing a lot of work from the home, their input is very valuable for that. But there's a lot of things that they can do so that when I first got on services, he wasn't around, so I was all by myself. I was like, oh, so I can just come home and be a mom and I don't have to do therapies. Because we weren't getting Medicaid or anything. We could not do any therapies. And I just got to go home and be a mom. I didn't have to do all this stuff with him anymore, and it was huge.
And I'm going to reference you guys to the green brochure I handed out. I will apologize. This is like the one outdated thing I'm handing you. We're trying to get through our print copies. If you go online, it's updated. But so most of this, the information is still correct. Once you hit page 6 and it outlines the services, these are the services under our old waivers. But by the time you get on, they'll probably be different anyway. So our services have always kind of ran along the same lines. Nothing in here is going to be super like, oh, wow, they used to do that. They don't do that anymore. We change the names once in a while. We dot different I's and cross different T's. But our services have remained fairly similar. So this will give you an idea of what you're purchasing when you're purchasing our services. Again, I mentioned we provide the funding and the oversight. So when we give you the funding, and I'll talk about how that's determined in a bit, but when we give you the funding, your service coordinator has a list that's like, here's all the services that are available, here's what they cost, and then you sit down together and you look at the descriptions and you decide, well, which services can I purchase to meet the needs I have? So it's kind of like a menu of services.
So you get a bucket of money.
Right.
And then they say, pick what's most important to your family. Is what you're saying?
What, yeah, what's important to your child.
Right,
yeah.
right.
There are, I believe, still restrictions on how much you can use for certain services, like for in-home residential, you can only use, so many hours.
Right.
That type of thing.
Right, and none of those limitations in here. If you go to our website and you look at our full service directory, it'll outline some of that stuff. For instance, with the day services, you can, and again, this is after school, so after someone's 21 and graduated, you can only use like 35 hours per week of day services, because we don't expect someone to work and use day services 80 hours a week. So 35 hours is kind of the cap on day. And no matter what combination of day services you pick, there's that cap.
Well, and with kids that are in school, one thing to remember is that if school is in session, you cannot use in-home services. You cannot cross that line because the school accesses Medicaid funds as well. Mm-hmm. So you cannot, if your kid gets kicked out of school for something, you cannot have your in-home residential done while school is taking place.
But any of these still, if we haven't applied, don't be thinking of services that I could use right now. Think of what he'll be using when he's like 14 instead, because it'll be 8 years.
Think about what you could use now, because you never know. He might fall into a priority, and I'll talk about the priorities, how UK comes in. First step is just apply. Definitely apply. So eligibility requirements. DD services eligibility. This brochure is going to tell you what determines a developmental disability in Nebraska. So a developmental disability does not have a federal definition. If you move to Iowa, if you move to Colorado, if you move to Georgia, developmental disability is going to have a different definition in that state. So being eligible in Nebraska doesn't mean you can move elsewhere and get services. Being eligible in California and moving here, you might not get them here.
So California might have a 1-year wait,
Every state has a wait list, I will tell you that.
but the wait list varies by state is what you're saying.
Not only the wait list, but what it takes to be eligible.
Agreed, okay, gotcha.
So in Nebraska, you have to be a citizen or a legal resident of the United States. Legal resident means you have a green card and have been here 1 year. You have to be a legal resident of Nebraska. So if you live across the river in Iowa, you can't apply for our services. You're not going to be eligible for them. You have to have a developmental disability. And then this is defined in state statute. So again, it's defined by Nebraska. It might look different in Colorado, might look different in any other state. But the developmental disability has to begin before the age 22. So it sounds like everyone here, your kids are under 22. If someone waits until they're 23 or 24 to apply, not only are they proving that they have a disability, but now you have to have documentation that this started before I turned 22.
I thought I had heard in a previous session that they're looking at upping that age.
And the age, the developmental disability age is actually a federal thing, but it's in state statute in Nebraska. So Nebraska has the ability to change that. As far as I know, we're not looking at changing it. Most developmental disabilities obviously happen before 22. Most of them become apparent in young children. A lot of them are before birth, or it's obvious before age 22. The one that kind of falls into this, though, is a traumatic brain injury. If someone has a traumatic brain injury and they're 21, they're eligible for our services because they're still in the developmental period. If that traumatic brain injury happens when they're 23, they can't come to us. There is a TBI waiver under Medicaid they would be eligible for, but that's a separate. A TBI after age 22 is not in the developmental period anymore. And then the need for services and supports has to be expected to be lifelong. So we don't expect people to come into our services and need it for a year or two and then like age out or learn everything they're going to learn. We do have some people occasionally that do. I've personally been service coordinator for a couple of people who once they were mid-20s, they were like, I don't want you anymore, I don't need you. And they did okay. They maybe could have used the support, but they did okay. We do have some people that move on. But most people, we expect that need to be lifelong. So, developmental disability. It's two-part. First, you have to have a diagnosis. And if you look at the services eligibility, the far left column is going to be what state statute says. So, the developmental disability has to be a diagnosis coming from a medical professional. It's the one with DD eligibility. You have two different ones there. So the diagnosis has to come from a medical professional or a psychologist operating the scope of their practice. A psychiatrist cannot diagnose, and that confuses some people because they'll think, well, this psychiatrist is prescribing me meds for X, Y, and Z. Clearly, I have X, Y, and Z. You may, but they're not the one diagnosing it. A psychiatrist cannot diagnose. School psychologists can usually not diagnose. There are some that can, but if you have a psychology degree and you're licensed to diagnose, you can probably get paid better not working in a school, so most of them don't. Really, we find mostly in small towns when the person's just like, I'm licensed to diagnose. Your school psychologist isn't going to know if they're licensed or not. They're not going to make a diagnosis if they're not.
I will say, I think when we applied, we just got the certificate that said that Ethan had where, the extra chromosome was, like we had to request that
Right, and for diagnosis, it is just something from the doctor. Oftentimes with Downs, it's the actual, like, here's the chromosomal testing that was done. We can't take a doctor that wrote, looks like he has Downs. We've seen that. It's not, it's not an official diagnosis. So we do see that. Substantial limitations in 3 areas is the next piece. So you have the diagnosis. Most of you, I'm guessing, are here because your child has Down syndrome. So you have the diagnosis. That piece is done, assuming you can give us documentation of it. The second piece is substantial limitations. So the 3 areas of limitation are conceptual, social, and practical. And here it kind of explains what that is. One of the places we see some people who have Down syndrome that don't qualify is social skills. We do need all 3 areas. When you are talking to someone about limitations, in social skills, some of the pieces to it are gullibility, social problem solving, the ability to avoid being victimized. So think of some of those things when you're really looking at social skills. We tend to think of people with Down syndrome as they're really outgoing, they're super friendly, everybody loves them, but is there a chance of being set up? Would they know that they're being set up by someone? And we want to think the best of our kids, right? We want to say, yeah, Billy can do everything. He's doing really good. He's got a lot of friends. We need you to step back and think, but what are the limitations? We're not paying because Billy is doing a fabulous job. We're paying because Billy needs some help with some things.
And that's, you're saying, we're just writing that down, or that's a doctor has to say those things in the...
For the limitations, we're looking at school records.
Oh, okay.
Eventually, once we say, yeah, you're eligible, then we're going to be doing a level of care assessment, and it's going to be a conversation. Once we're ready to talk about funding, we're going to come and do an ICAP assessment. We're looking at documentation from the school for that, but it's also a conversation. It's answering questions. But as far as actually when we get the application in, for limitations, we're looking at what the school has said. So what we request from the school, we request the most recent IEP. We don't care what the school was actively working on 5 years ago. We want to know the current things the school is working on.
You said this is for IEP?
Yes.
ICAP?
What is
ICAP?
Inventory for client and agency planning. You will never hear the words. You will always hear ICAP.
And it's just an assessment?
Yes, the ICAP is it's the objective assessment that the state uses to determine funding.
I think I did. I'd show you what it looks like, but I pulled off my course stuff.
But yeah, as far as
Amazed at how much you have there.
I know she definitely knows.
I'm sick at how much.
so as far as like when we're getting an application, we're looking at school records and we're looking at the doctors. Those are the 2 things that are really giving us those 2 parts of the puzzle. So one of the handouts today, and it's only going to be applicable to those of you who have not yet applied, but applying for DD services. And this is how to apply online. You can go to our website, you can print a paper application, you can call us and say, I want a paper application. We'll give you one. We recommend applying online. It comes to us faster, it's cleaner, it's confidential. So when you go to Access Nebraska, you may go to the same place to apply for Medicaid. If you haven't applied for Medicaid, go to the same place and apply for Medicaid. But you're going to click on Developmental Disabilities Application. This document's going to be screenshot by screenshot exactly what you're going to see when you fill it out.
You do have to be denied for Medicaid before you do this, correct?
No.
No?
Nope.
Used to.
You don't even have to apply for Medicaid.
Really?
For someone who's over 19, we're not going to put you on the wait list until you've accepted Medicaid. But if you're under 19, you can be on our wait list. So we want you to apply for Medicaid, but as long as you've applied for developmental disabilities, especially as a youth, you're good. So in this, you'll see some hints. For example, the first question is, do you have a developmental disability? If you click no, stop filling it out. It's wasting everybody's time. We see that too. Part of the application process is you're giving us consent to release information, or you're giving other people. So you're telling us the names of what doctors have I seen. Have I seen a geneticist? Are they the one who's going to give me that diagnosis? It may not be pertinent to the diagnosis, but do we have an orthopedic we work with that could give additional, yeah, there's some limitations. We do want to know about any specialists, because maybe the IEP from the school isn't going to catch some of those limitations that a specialist might be like, they can't do that, or they shouldn't do that. So we're going to reach out and we're going to get the records. Sometimes parents ask me, can I send you records? Sure. If you have them, you are welcome to send them in, but we will also reach out and get them. We don't require anyone to send us the actual records. So when you fill this out, you've hit submit, or you've received a paper copy in the mail, it's going to be assigned to a disability service specialist. That DSS is going to give you a call within 2 days of getting your application. And they're going to say, hey, I got your application. They're going to say, here's the
It
doc.
doesn't do that, right?
Right.
Because that's where I'm like, I think I applied.
Yeah.
I hope they received it.
And we didn't used to do this, so if you've applied in the past, yeah, it hit.
Just to be like, this is awesome.
So they're going to give you a call and they're going to say, got your application. Number one, did you mean to apply for developmental disability services? Some people don't. Once they get the yes, they're going to say, here's the doctors you listed. Is there any doctor you forgot? Are there any other specialists? And then you'll have a conversation. You'll sign additional consents if you need to. They're going to say, here's the schools you listed. Any other schools you forgot? Your current school is probably going to have records for all your schools. But if you've moved around a lot, especially if you've jumped around states, they may not have everything. You may want to give more than one school. So then once we have that conversation, we know, yes, you meant to apply. Yes, we know who to contact. That DSS is going to reach out and request the information. So they're going to contact the schools. They're going to contact the doctors. They're going to give them 30 days. So they know what they requested. If they get everything back in 5 days, they'll make a decision then. But at the end of 30 days, they'll make a decision based on whatever they have received. So if a doctor doesn't get us information in 30 days, he's not going to. So we're going to go ahead and determine it at the 30-day point if we haven't received everything before then.
So telling the doctors ahead of time that you're doing this might not be a bad idea.
And that is a good idea. Just doctors' offices like to know what to expect. So once you make that decision, we're going to let you know what it is. We're going to send you a letter in writing. We call it a notice of decision. It's going to say either you're not eligible or you're eligible. So if you're not eligible, you can appeal that decision. You can say, I think we are eligible. I think we have the documentation. The first thing you can do, the easiest step, is to call that 800 number and say, can I speak to the person who made the determination? You can speak to that person. You can ask them, what did you receive? Maybe they never heard from your doctor, so they didn't have a diagnosis, so they said not eligible. That's an easy fix. So that could be your first easy step. With the not eligible documentation, it's also going to say if you want to file an appeal, and actually you'll stop the clock, then we'll start kind of more formal discussions. And we have a psychologist. We have, I think, a couple psychologists employed by our division. They can look at your application. Maybe we have enough information from the MDT. Again, an MDT is not a diagnosis. We will never use an MDT as a diagnosis. Multidisciplinary, yeah. It's a school thing.
Process that you're going in right now.
Oh,
So the paperwork that you signed, yeah, the paperwork that you signed, you allowed them to test. Now you're gonna go back in and you're gonna have the MDT.
all right.
So,
And when you get a notice from them, it's going to have something in the middle that looks like that. That's how you know that that's one, this is not one of those, but it's very similar to this. That's what they look like.
so yeah, we have a we have a psychologist on that can look at that MDT and say, well, we didn't get stuff from the doctor, but there's enough information in this MDT that I can make the diagnosis as a psychologist. So we do have that occasionally happen, where our psychologist will be able to do a paperwork review and make a diagnosis. We don't want that to be the norm. Our psychologist has other things she's doing other than diagnosing everyone that wants a diagnosis. But that is an option that's out there.
So, I mean, typically with a child diagnosis, with a diagnosis of Down syndrome, what are the three areas that you're looking for, looking at MDTs and things like that? You know, typically with our kids, the older they get, the more deficit you see. So, I mean, I was able to apply at 9 months, which was not easy to do. But at 9 months old, with the way that the process is now, you're not really gonna know enough of like social skills and things like that.
And we don't actually look at that at 9 months.
Okay, so somebody with a baby can
right.
still apply.
Yes. And I believe, so last little paragraph on the bottom of this eligibility one. If a person is under the age of 9, through the age of 9, everybody through the age of 9 has a bunch of limitations, right? My children don't have disabilities. They're under the age of 9. They have a lot of limitations. There's a lot of stuff they're not going to be doing. If you're under the age of 9, we're not looking at limitations. We are only looking for a diagnosis. So you can get on the wait list without limitations through 9. At 9 years and at 18 years, we do run, like that's when we look at limitations. So if you have a child who's 7, you've applied, they're on the wait list. Around their 9th birthday, we're going to be giving you a call to say, hey, now we need to start looking at limitations. And then again at 18, hey, we need to make sure the limitations are still there. It's not really a big deal now that every year we're doing level of care for everyone on the wait list. So that extra of the limitations there, well, we're really looking at it every year now. But prior to the last few months, we hadn't been doing that. So it was kind of two big milestones that at these points, we're going to see if the limitations are there.
So then you're saying if you get the letter that says you're accepted, then that means you're on the list.
Right, and you'll also, if you're eligible, you're also getting a phone call. So you get the letter, you're also getting a phone call from this lady, Kathy. Kathy is going to say, hey, you're eligible for services. First of all, she's going to say, if you have Medicaid, do you want a service coordinator? You can have one if you don't have Medicaid, but they're going to charge you. So unless you want to pay like $300 a month for a person to give you a phone call once a month. Most people don't want a service coordinator. But if you have Medicaid, Medicaid will pay for that. And then maybe you do want that person because maybe they could help advocate for you at an IEP.
We can also help with other things like in Lincoln they have the Lumar grants for certain things that you can get that are related to disability. We used it for getting car seat for Coda because it was outgrew all the other ones. They can help you with different avenues of getting respite, things like that. So I mean, if you can get one for free, it is helpful.
Okay, but that's only if you already have a DD waiver, right? That you can
No.
On the wait list, correct. If you're on the wait
Oh, on
list
the
and receiving Medicaid, you can get
You can get a service coordinator. I don't know about the different grants.
But the Lomar, I didn't know
The
about
Lomar
commercial.
it's, the money is dished out based on merit of the application, and the service coordinator is the one who would have to fill that out and submit it for you.
Gotcha.
So yeah, and we are really, now if a person is on the wait list and they choose to have a service coordinator, in the past it was just kind of once a year they would give you a call and say, hey, you're still on the wait list, I'm your service coordinator. At this time, since Medicaid's paying for it as a monthly service, we expect that service coordinator to have a meaningful contact with you every month. So if you choose to have a service coordinator, they are going to bug you hopefully at least once a month. They are actually going to do plans with you now. You're going to have, we call our plan an ISP, individual support plan. It's very similar to the IEPs. So if you're familiar with IEPs, when you move into adult services or you move into waiver services, it's now an ISP for us. So even if you're on the wait list, you're technically going to have an ISP. It's going to be just very basic. There's not going to be a provider that we're paying, so there's not a lot of discussion, but we'll at least be meeting and getting to know each other. And ideally, that service coordinator will get to know you before you get onto services, and then they'll have a better idea of what you want to purchase.